This is the kind of American you're up against. And why you don't stand a chance, you asshole.
Welcome to another Liquid Bullet Productionz. Joining me today is an absolute great guest for you. Martial art movies, action movies, also a great martial artist, a competition fighter, Keith Vitali. Thank you, Keith, for coming on.
Thank you, Lee. I'm really excited to be on your show today.
So, Keith, we've got quite a lot to run through. Obviously, very well known for all your movies, No Retreat, No Surrenders, American Kickboxer, you know, just to name a few. Also, your martial art fighting career. You're a great fighter in your time. But before we go into all that stuff, can I just roll you back to the beginning, a little bit of sort of where you was born and your upbringing, etc.
Sure, yeah. I'm in America. I'm on the East Coast, and I'm in the South from South Carolina. I now live in Atlanta, Georgia, but I grew up in South Carolina. Now, I started off early. My dad was in the service, and so I spent my first 4 years, my early childhood in Italy, living in Rome. So I was very fortunate. I got my love of adventure and travel from living over there. And then when I came back, I was literally in the third grade at 7 years old. And here, normally, the first grade, you're in, I don't know what age you start, but I was in the third grade at 7 years old. So I was usually the smallest one in my class, the youngest one in my class. And so I never really got bullied that much, but growing up, I was always the smallest. So then I got involved in martial arts while I was in college and just fell in love with it. I had a track background. I had a scholarship to a university in Charleston for running distance running. So I was very blessed to have long legs, good cardiovascular. So you can imagine when I got involved in the martial arts, I'm entering a new sport where I had a really good advantage. I had good wind, so I could fight for a long time, and I had strong legs from running all the distance. So when I started competing, I really had an advantage over a lot of my opponents. And then when my skill level picked up, then I started to do very well in competition. So I did well in competition. I did locally, then went nationally, then traveled around the world competing. I was very fortunate to be the top fighter in America, all weight classes for 3 years. And I followed a guy named Bill Wallace, Superfoot, So he was for the 3 years prior than me. I followed him, and then because of my success in the martial arts, I was on a lot of covers of magazines, and it's the covers that really propelled me into the film world because there was a lady from Canon Films that were looking for new stars, and everybody's always looking for the next star, the newest star. And she saw me on a few covers and called me up, and then that's how I started. My first film was Revenge of the Ninja with Sho Kosugi. Just happened to be the first film that got picked up by MGM, put in every theater in the United States because back then the martial arts movies weren't picked up with domestic releases. They weren't in theaters. If you had to see one, you had to see it on a VHS tape or whatever. But so I happened to be starring in the first film that had a national global release, and so that was really exciting for me.
Awesome. So Keith, can I just roll you back there? So, what inspired you to first start martial arts? Was it something that sort of you'd seen, or what sort of made you want to get into the martial arts in the first place?
You know, it's most people I speak with were inspired by so many of these great fighters or film stars. I really wasn't. I was running track, came home from Charleston, South Carolina to Columbia, where I was living. And an old high school buddy of mine named John Bellinger came over to the house and he said, "Listen, I'm taking something called karate, it's martial arts." I'd never even heard of it. And I've seen Kung Fu theater, and usually that was very animated. Those were the Kung Fu Saturday cartoons characters. They would fly over trees and doing funny things. But I've really never seen martial arts films. And then he said, "I'd like to take you over to a karate class and introduce you to my instructor, who's a Korean, black belt named John Roper." I said, "Fine." So we drove over there, went to University of South Carolina where he was teaching, and I sat there and I watched. I had never seen kicks and punches before, so I sat there watching, and there was a small guy fighting a larger guy, and he was doing a pretty good job using hands and feet, and I had never seen a small guy stand up to a bigger guy this way, and I was pretty excited. After the class, the instructor comes over, John Bellinger, introduces me to John Roper, and John Roper says, "If you're ever interested in taking martial arts, um, feel free to come and join the class." Well, here's how impulsive or compulsive of a personality that I had. I was so excited. I went home that day, called my track coach up, dropped my scholarship, said, "I'm not coming back to Charleston. I am going to transfer, go to University of South Carolina." I went to the admissions office, got my records. I physically drove over to the admissions office in South Carolina. I handed it to them, said, "I want to start going to a class here." Took about a week for me to be okayed and admitted to the University of South Carolina. It was the beginning of the semester, and then I walked into my first class. And there was John Roper, and my parents were upset because I had to pay for my own college funds after that because my scholarship was taking care of my track, but I didn't care, and that's how I started. I was just that excited, and it was, I guess, my instructor that excited me more than anybody else. And then I started seeing films. I started seeing Bruce Lee hadn't even come out yet. Then Bruce Lee came out. When Bruce Lee came out, it was all over but the crime for me. I remember going to the theater and there was a line wrapped around the block. I mean, literally a line that goes up and down the street to get into the theater to see Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee. When I saw that, I just said, I'm in the right place at the right time. But I never thought of myself as a future film actor, star, etc. I just enjoyed watching somebody that had this athletic ability that was incredible. My love was the fighting. My love was competing. I love traveling around the country and around the world and competing. I was so driven because of martial arts or my prior track and cross country that I love competition. And plus, I played some other sports and baseball and tennis. But my personality is I literally wanted to find the best people. So I would travel and train with people like Chuck Norris and Bill Wallace and Joe Louis. These were big names in the United States at the time, or just coming up. They were just starting. but anybody that I could find that I could go share some knowledge with, I would go train with. And then I wrote the charter and the bylaws for the Carolina program. It was a Carolina club, the University of South Carolina club. And I went into the administration and I said, I'd like to get funded and have you guys pay for our karate team. So I began, they did, they agreed. We started one of the first collegiate karate clubs in the nation at USC. But what that afforded me was it allowed me, I had funds now to put a team together, and we could then travel around the country and compete and have it paid for. In spite of us, our goal at that time wasn't to be the best fighters. We were in college. Our goal was to get laid, have fun, go socialize, just have fun in college. But guess what? When you travel and train and compete and fight with the best, you get better regardless if that was your intentions or not. So I didn't know it at the time. I was getting better all the time because I was training with or competing against higher caliber people from all over the country. And then before you know it, I'm entering competition and I'm doing very well.
Keith, can I just ask you, what style of karate did you originally start? Was it like a traditional sort of style, like
Very,
Shotokan
very
or
traditional. It's called Taekwondo. I had a Korean
Taekwondo?
instructor, Taekwondo, and he forbade us when we were coming up to even enter in any other kind of tournaments. We had to just fight Taekwondo tournaments. That's the only thing they thought that was any good. So I would compete in those tournaments, but without telling my instructor, I would go off and then start competing in other tournaments as well, what we called open tournaments. I didn't know anything. Nobody was then it was early stages of martial arts of competition. I would just go to tournaments. I'd find one, I'd go enter, and I would usually be the first person at the door. I would be, here it is 7 o'clock in the morning. I don't have a cup, mouth, nothing. I just have my uniform and I'm waiting. And people would come in and they go, "You're here early." I didn't know any better. I'd go, "Yeah, I'm just here to fight." And I love fighting that much. And then, I just started loving it. And that's how I started my path of success.
So Keith, when you first started the fighting, was it very much sort of the traditional Taekwondo side, and then it sort of formed into the full contact karate, which is basically the
Right.
sort of formality of kickboxing now, isn't it? It's you guys were sort of the
Right.
first generation to set that off, really, weren't you?
Right. Good question. Yeah, it was pre-gear, so I had no gear. It was just hands and feet without any pads. So I started that way. And I was fairly tall, being 6 feet, so they would line you up, and then at tournaments, based on your height, and then it would split you up lightweight or whatever, heavyweight, and then you would fight for the grand championships. And that's how I started that way. But it was quite an experience. And so I progressed that way over the years. We had what we called tournament point fighting in this country and all over the world. It was a big deal all over the world at the time because um, it was popular. America's point fighting was popular all over the world. When I was on the magazine covers and I go to Europe, people would recognize me in martial arts because I was on the covers that they would have. Later, I then progressed into what they called kickboxing or full contact karate, the predecessor for MMA karate. And so I fought some full contact, about 9 bouts, full contact. And I would do like on a Saturday, I might be fighting full contact match. Then on Sunday, I might be fighting a point tournament or whatever. And I loved it. Sometimes I'd fight on a Saturday on the East Coast, win, take that money, go buy a ticket, fly to the West Coast, enter a tournament on a Sunday, and fight and win that day as well.
Wow,
But it
that's
was this
quite hardcore
experience.
doing that 2 days on the trot.
Yeah, and there was times where I fought, 16, 17 times in a weekend.
Wow, that's a lot of fighting. There must be a lot of recovery time in there with injuries and sort of stuff, isn't there? Or,
Nope, I literally fought at the right time. They placed me in martial arts tournament fighting at the right era. Here I am. I am now coming from a background of track and field and distance running. So I know I'm in better shape than anybody I'm going to fight. I don't care who you are. I am going to fight you. And when you're tired, I don't know if you've ever sparred before, but when you're tired, it's hard to pick up your hands and your and kick. I don't care what sport. When you get so depleted and your energy levels down and you can't move, I don't care who you are. I will beat the hell out of you if you're tired. If you're in great shape, that's a whole different story. But I'll beat Bruce Lee up and his dad and Jackie Chan and his dad up if they're tired. They can't raise their hands up. Doesn't matter. So I knew going in, I had a great advantage. Then I just happened to have strong legs and I had very good form because I had a Korean instructor that just worked on power and technique. And I developed my sidekick, and my sidekick was my marquee technique. So I had a sidekick that I could literally stop anybody or hurt anybody. And then I had good cardiovascular where I could fight and not get tired. So I knew I had an advantage usually when I would go fight. And not only that, so get this, I would go to the tournament before my competition. I would go up to 7 to 8 people every tournament and go, hey, would you mind if we spar a little bit first? Because I wanted to work out with 8 people before I even got in the ring one time. And everybody was usually first they were okay, but most people got excited because I was the number one fighter in the country, and they wanted to spar with me a little bit. Now it's light sparring, we're not going that hard, but I would get the just the uh, advantage of sparring all these different people, and all that accumulated and added up to just to experience. And so I'd fight 8 people before I jumped in the ring, and I could do that because I was in such good shape. And I remember I'd fight sometimes and I'd be ready as soon as I would fight for the finals. I go, I don't need a rest. Let's just go, because I was in that kind of shape.
Wow, that's amazing. Did you find like by doing that, sparring people before the fights, sometimes you'd already won the fights because people had lost the heart watching you sparring and stuff?
Well, it's sometimes because what I would do too is I had one of my best mates. His name was Mike Geneva, top 10 fighter in the country. And right before we would work, right before the tournament, right before, I'm sorry, the competition would start, I've already finished working out with a bunch of people, but then I would showcase some of my kicks. Now, everybody's sitting watching. I know they're watching. And I did two things. I would bring in 2 uniforms on my shoulders. I'd walk into the arena with 2 uniforms. And people thought that was so cocky. One was for fighting during the day. My second uniform was for the grand champion match at night. Now, how did I know I was going to win my grand championship tonight? Well, see, that was already what I was inserting into your brain. So I'm walking in with 2 uniforms, and they go, "That guy's so cocky. He knows he's going to make it to the finals tonight." But I wanted a fresh uniform for the finals, and then I'd get up and I'd do my kicks. And here was my advantage. I thought I was a pretty smart fighter. I had to because I'm not the tallest, fastest, strongest, or anything. So I really had to use my brain. But if I could intimidate you to a small degree, when the referee says bow to each other, get in your fighting stances, and he says go, if I can get you to stop for a split second and just to be, to sit back and go, well, I don't want to rush in because I just saw everything he can do. And so what that does is it puts you back on your heels and allows me to be aggressive. And then I can be the one who starts to fight off very assertive and aggressive, and I go first. And when you go first, now I have you fighting defensively. But what happens is if you didn't know who I was, you wouldn't be tentative. You would just bow and come and go, hey, I don't look like anything. They go, oh, I just roll, run me over. But my reputation preceded myself. And so when I got in the ring, they would stand there and go, well, I better be tentative and check them out and fill them out. Good, fill me out all you want because that allows me to be first and then come at you.
Kev, can I just ask you, what was your favourite techniques to land in competition? I've seen some of your fights and I've seen you land some amazing hook kicks and spinning kicks. But what was your best moves that you liked?
All that stuff was my scoring techniques, but my favorite technique was my sidekick. And I've got fights on film, but they don't show a lot of my sidekicks. But my sidekicks are what stopped everything. If you're 6'5" and you're 240, 50 pounds, you're fighting me, you'll run over me if I didn't have a sidekick. The sidekick is the single best effective technique in all martial arts. You have to have a sidekick to be successful. Your round kick's not going to stop anybody because it's circular. And it's circular. All you have to do is block it and move in. Your front kick, you can back away, but your punches, you can back away. But your side kick is a very great defensive weapon. In order to hit me, in order to score on me or hit me or hurt me or knock me out, you have to open up. So when you blitz or come into punch or kick, you're open. And my side kick is what would stop you. And I had a side kick from hell. My side kick, now get this, I was a white belt for 1 year because my instructor was just insane. I loved the man, but he just tortured me, kept me a white belt for a solid year. During that 1 year, I broke 52 different people's ribs with the side kick. Gear hadn't been invented yet, but we had opportunities from people from all over the country would come into. There was a army fort called Fort Jackson in Columbia, and we had merchant marines and people would come in and they'd always visit our karate school because they always wanted to fight. And when they would come in to fight, my instructor would have them challenge me. Now I was a white belt, so I got beaten up most of the time. These guys are big men or whatever, but I learned very quickly how to stop them with a side kick. So that became my expertise. So when I would go in the ring, the first thing in your mind is not round kick, side kick, back fist punch. You didn't care. All you thought was when you fought me was, I don't want Keith Vitali to break my ribs with his side kick. So that's in your mind. So now you're tentative. You're tentative. And when I would throw a technique and you'd raise that arm, just your elbow an inch like that, I'm going to hit you. And if you came at me, blitz me, I'm going to hit you. So I've got you kind of stationary. Now I can do my thing.
Did you say you trained with Bill Wallace for quite some time?
Oh, yes.
Coincidence, I was
Sure.
training with him last week in England. He done a seminar.
Yes, and there's two people that had first three really. There was Chuck Norris, who I would watch fight, and he's just so smart. We're close to the same height and weight. He's not the biggest, fastest, or strongest. He was one of the smartest fighters. So he would use technique and set up his opponents, and so I followed that as my inspiration. Two, I started working out with Bill Wallace and Bill Wallace's techniques. And so he taught me the hook kicks, all the standing on one leg and doing those. Now, this was at a time before anybody in the country was doing it. So I had an advantage learning how to do that. And then three, Joe Lewis would come in. I trained with him and he taught me movement, believe it or not. Back in the old days, you were not allowed to move in the ring. Old traditional karate meant you stood still and you're not allowed to move. The advantage I had was when I said I was very advantageous to be fighting in an era, I was a moving fighter that learned how to move indirect angles and movement. And imagine just a great fighter that just moves and moves and moves. That was me fighting in an entire era of standstill fighters. So now these people I'm competing are standing still and I'm doing this. And every time I throw a technique, I'm going to hit you with it if you don't block it. But if you block it, I'm going to hit you. Why? Because you're standing still. And that was, I don't care who you were, where you were. I don't care who you are. If you stand still, I would hurt you. I would beat you. Like now, technology or the advanced fighters, everybody moves. What I do as well now, who knows? Because everybody's moving. But I don't say I'm the best fighter of all time. I was so fortunate to fight in an era where I got a chance to fight, even when I go to other countries. I'm fighting fighters standing still. And I remember I fought in South America. I fought all over South. I fought in, the Amazons. And I'm fighting guys twice my size. But I went, they don't have a chance. I said, they can't beat me if they're standing still because my back fist is just fast. I'm not the fastest in the world, but it's fast enough to where I can do demonstrations, hold your hands up, put on pads and hold your hands up. And I'll go, whenever you let me know when you're ready, I'll still hit you with my back fist. There's nothing you can do to stop me. It was that fast. So I can just blip so fast and hit you with the back fist. So if I'm doing that and you're standing still and you raise your hand to block it, well, everything's open. So now I'm throwing my side kick, my hook round, side hook round, all my junk stuff. And you can't stop everything. And that's Bill Wallace had that influence on me. So just imagine Joe Lewis for power and movement, Bill Wallace for all those techniques. And then I had Chuck Norris. It inspired me on how to fight. Did I come up in the best generation of all time or what? I mean, these are all who's name, who's who. but I was very fortunate in my career.
Did you get many injuries sort of in the training, preparing for fights and stuff, Keith? Or
You get your small injuries. I trained with a guy named Mike Stone. Other guys in England knew who Mike Stone was, and he was an undefeated fighter in the era of Bruce Lee, Joe Louis, back in those days before mine. But he befriended me, and we would train together in Los Angeles, and he was just phenomenal. So I learned a lot from him as well about the mental attitude, because in his mind he couldn't be beaten because he's already won the fight. He would go into the match going, "I've already won," and that mental, just that attitude itself, the other opponent sometimes can pick up on that.
yeah, Keith, can I just ask you, who do you think your toughest opponent was in your fighting days?
There's a guy named Ray McCallum. He was heavier than me, and he was he had better technique than I ever did. He was a black belt in judo too. So he could get in the midst of a point fight, grab me, flip me over his shoulders, and then would land on the ground. He would hit me up, 5 times before the referees would break it up. Now I'm having to fight him in grand championship matches where there's 3 rounds and there's a lot of flipping, a lot of fighting. I mean, he was tough, and I was the number 1 fighter for 3 years. He was the number 2 fighter in the nation for 3 years. He beat me one time. I beat him twice, but there was a rivalry, and it was a great era because we didn't have a lot of different associations back then. It's like the whole world knew who was the number 1 fighter in the country or the number 10 fighter in the country. We had all the magazines had the same, rating system. So this guy, he was out to get me. We're friends today. We love each other today, but back then we didn't love each other. He say things about me and I say things about him, and it'd be in print. And you say this stuff in print, and I was so fortunate because my era also had magazines. Today it's streaming. Nobody knows. I guarantee in the UK or anywhere in the country, you go, who are the top fighters in the country in points or tournament fighting? You go, I don't know. There's like 100 different associations, and there's no. Well, back then you go to the bookstore, magazine store, you pick up your magazine. Bruce Lee might be on the cover. You open it up, and they go, here are your top 10 fighters. And that's what I did. I picked my first magazine up and I saw Joe Louis and Bill Wallace and Jeff Smith and all these great fighters. I went, oh my gosh, I want to do that one day. I want to be like them. And then before you knew it, I was there. So I came in a great era. Not only that, we had the magazine covers. I was on like 13 different covers in like 1 year. So that went all over the world. And then I was a top fighter. We had the magazines followed us, did stories on us. When they do stories on your magazines, they're creating stars. They're creating heroes or people to inspire others. And so when these people would get these magazines, they go, oh, I want to be like this guy. And all the top 10 had covers of magazines. What a great era I was in. And we fought on TV a good bit as well. So we were very fortunate.
I can remember personally seeing you on loads of magazines and obviously then into the films as I was coming up and coming up as a sort of teenager and stuff.
Oh, that's so cool.
Can I just ask you there, Keith? So what sort of led you into the film industry with your martial arts?
Good question. I was teaching. I had a karate school at the time, and I'm in the South, like I said, in Atlanta, Georgia. And a phone rang, and there was a lady named Priscilla McDonald, and she worked for Canon Films for Menachem uh, uh, Golan. And she just said, hey, I want to offer you, I just saw you on a couple covers, and I would like to offer you a 3-movie deal. The first one is called Revenge of the Ninja. And I didn't know anything, so I go out there, and it was very fortunate. But right before that, I was in one film called Force 5. And I went out there, and Pat Johnson brought me out with Joe Corley. And my first time ever seeing a martial arts film. And I was a nobody. But I was a top fighter in the country at the time. So they realized who I was, but they had me as a stunt person. So I was just one of the fighters. But the stars were people like Richard Norton, Benny Urquidez. So it was a really good movie. Joe Louis starred in it. And Robert Klaus, who was the director of Enter the Dragon when Bruce Lee was the director. So I'm on my first set, I'm watching all of this, and I went, oh, I'm not sure I can do this real well. My first fight scene was against an actor called Richard Norton. I don't know if you know who Richard Norton is.
Yeah, I know Richard, yeah.
Yeah, but he was fantastic. Still one of my great friends today. So that's my first fight scene against him. And then that was it. I go home, and then I get this phone call to fly to Los Angeles, and I got my first film in Revenge of the Ninja, and then it exploded all over the screens. It was all over the world. I had two premieres. I went to Los Angeles for a premiere for a martial arts movie, my first one ever. And I know years later, I have friends like very good friends, like from the UK, Gary Daniels. He was in 30 films before he got his first, his release.
Wow.
And it's just hard to get to a movie theater. That's what they call a a theatrical release. And I was very fortunate. My first one, I star in. I'm in every theater in the whole world, basically.